Social Perceptions and Cultural Differences by Ashley Lopez. There are many different ways in which we process, observe, and store information about an individual that leads to a perception. One way that we observe and process information about people can be based on web-based social cognition. Sabates, 2012, says how we observe, process, and store information about an individual socially via cyber world is web-based social cognition. So some examples of these include Facebook, Instagram, chat, Messenger, Snapchat, email, or any other web-related social media. How does culture relate to our perception? It relates to our perception of ourselves because it creates a framework for how we perceive the world around us. It influences our way of thinking, how we respond to one another, and it gives us a shared belief in certain aspects in our culture. It relates to the perception of others because basically our framework is based upon our perception and not the perception of others. Therefore, this is where it can get misleading because it may lead to a lot of miscommunication or misperceptions in different cultures. Julian Borelli on TED Talk stated, "The lens through which the brain sees the world shapes your reality." And I believe this to be 100% true because we're often too focused on our own perception of the world and how we see things culturally from our perspective that it's hard for us to open up and be diverse and try to get into the perception of other people. Do these perceptions vary in cultures? How do they vary and why do they vary? Well, first, some examples of how they vary include religion, social situations, like you could be talkative or reserved, or independent and dependent family situations or dynamics. So basically, you can have somebody in the family who may be codependent upon each other, and then there are some cultures that like independence. Why they vary? It could be with their upbringing, how they were raised, their social environment, or their own framework, worldview for how they understand, see, and perceive things or people is why they vary. So I took two cultures and I kind of put them up against each other to see what the differences were and what some of the similarities were. And I chose American culture and African culture. And in American culture, Comuniscio Global states this about American cultures. We have different religious values, so we have the freedom of religion here in America. We like our personal space, especially with people we do not know. We don't necessarily go in or start touching people that we don't know. We believe in tipping. We are pretty heavily reliable on our smartphones or any tech-savvy thing. We are also very punctual here in America. We do handshakes or hello and eye contact. And we uphold to a different standard of beauty than some other cultures. And I believe that sometimes in our culture we tend to go on the thin side represents beauty. We are relational. We are future-oriented. We like to set goals for the future. We celebrate holidays, and we are gender equality. Idang 2015 says this about African culture. They have a strict set of values that are enforced, and a lot of this has to do with their religion because they want to avoid curses on them and those around them. They also some African cultures use shame to punish the offender. So if they're breaking any moral or religious codes, they will use shame to kind of shame the offender into punishment. They also worship different deities on different days. They recognize that they do have souls, but they use sorcerers as a mediator between God and man. So basically, with their religion, they go back and forth with the sorcerer, so they'll use the sorcerer to explain what God is telling the sorcerer to them. So they get information from the sorcerer to mediate between God and them. Their value of beauty is different than that of American culture. They value a woman's beauty by indulging her with food to kind of plump her up. And they think that this makes for an idealistic mother/wife. They also dwell more on past events or current situations, and they do not look up to the future as much. It doesn't mean that they're not looking towards the future, but they just like to spend the time in past events and currently where they are then. They're not really into time management as much. They also enjoy silence. They feel perfectly fine when they're just sitting there and no one's talking. They wear loose garbs, and in some cultures, tattoos can relate to a higher class, and they are also very relational beings. Things that I found that were surprising. I found it surprising that some cultures use the shameful tactics to punish the accuser of immoral or wrongdoing. I just found that way different from our culture, because I do know that some people do shame people, but it's not like on purpose, so to speak. Like, we don't, in their culture, it said that if somebody was stealing, they would strip them naked, and then they'd have to carry around the thing that they stole all day. And I also found that their religious affiliations were shared through much of Africa, and I'm not sure if that's because that they have different deities that they worship, but it's pretty consistent spiritually wise. They believe that they have a soul, and they worship many different gods. And personal space did not seem to be as big of an issue to African culture as compared to American culture. We do tend to like our space, especially with people we do not know. And another surprising fact I found was we all long for relationships and belonging. It didn't matter if it was in the African culture or American culture, we all want to feel a sense of purpose and belonging. The research has changed my perception in a couple of different ways. It opened my eyes to diversity. It made me realize how some cultures perceive things from their worldview. It reiterated the fact that we are all social and relational beings who want to belong, but we communicate differently. And just because we communicate a little bit differently, we can end up miscommunicating sometimes because our perceptions are a little bit off. And it reiterated the fact that we all want to belong and have a sense of purpose. I believe that realizing each other's cultural differences helps us in understanding and reaching out to others. And Psalms 133:1 in the New International Version states how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. And I think that this brings it all back to scriptural evidence, because we are created to be relational beings, and we are created to be in relation and have a sense of belonging with one another. And socially, I think this is what God intended for us. And here is a list of my references right here. And that is all I have. So thank you.